So good morning, everybody, and I want to thank Wendy and Scott and Paul and Allison for inviting me and give Paul full credit for the title of my presentation, The Walls Come Tumbling Down. So as Wendy said, I run the New York Hall of Science. We're New York City's hands-on interactive science center. That's us behind me. And I show this image because our place is really important. We were created as part of the 1964 World's Fair, and obviously the campus has grown enormously since then. We're located in Queens, and that's really important to us as well because we serve one of the most diverse populations of visitors. And I'll come back to this, but we think a lot about strategies of engagement that have a very kind of low barrier to entry, accessible. We want everybody to feel a sense of their possibility and power, but also that have a high ceiling for possibility. So this is what learning and engagement looks like in our museum. It also looks like this, and I love this slide. These were two young girls building in our design lab in the sandbox area. And clearly mom or somebody posted this on Instagram. But when I saw this, I thought, whoa, you know, something's happening that's right. Guidance, encouragement, empowerment. We love NYSCI. That was good. And engineers, right? Engineers with a smiley face. So what are we doing? We use these strategies of engagement. We call them design, make, play. And here's a bit about what we mean, but I want to go back to something Tim said this morning, because I think he nailed it. I've been thinking about this a lot. You know, science, we think of science in particular, as a domain that is about giving us answers, right? All you have to do is confront a big medical crisis to know you want answers from science, right? But we really sort of get it wrong in teaching and engaging kids about science because we sort of transport the answer strategy, or another way of thinking about it is we turn science learning into a very didactic enterprise. And we're trying to do something very different at the New York Hall of Science, which is kind of, again, going back to what Tim said, marry content with emotion. And design, make, play are strategies of engagement that we think go a long way to getting us there. So how do we go about this? We like to say we work in three ways. So we work through our place, our museum, as a destination. We work through partnerships. One of our most visible partnerships is with Maker Media. And we now host the second largest Maker Fair in the world at the New York Hall of Science, September 26th and 27th of this year, for those of you who want to come. And increasingly, we work through products, through experiences that you can use irrespective of whether you've ever been to our museum. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. And to create these experiences, we think a lot about kind of leveraging the power of our place. So back to those images you saw, we think a lot about how to support deep engagement on the part of kids, how to get them passionate about learning. Particularly in the STEM fields, but you'll see it's kind of steamy. We don't call it STEAM for a bunch of reasons, but we talk about that later. So I'm gonna show you a suite of tools and resources, digital tools that we've created that we call Noticing by NYSCI. And briefly, so the tools put people in play at the center. I love this image because the girls are so terrifically engaged in this task. And as one of my colleagues pointed out, we spend tons of time, particularly in the world of schools, worrying about getting kids on task. Well, these girls are in the task. And in fact, in our apps, kids are often the subject of data that they're investigating. We privilege the whole idea of divergent solutions. There's not one right answer, right? There are lots of ways to solve a problem. And there are all sorts of different ways you can express that process. We talk about noticing, not gaming. We're not anti-gaming. I don't want anybody in this crowd to think that. But we value noticing because we are really trying to get at the intrinsic motivation piece of the puzzle. And then finally, we really privilege kids as creators, not just consumers of experiences. So here's our noticing suite. And so the thing I want to point out here is that these are designed for kind of middle grade students, sort of 9 to 12. And they're topics that kids get tripped up over routinely in the curriculum. And they're topics that make kids feel like, I can't do this, I'm not good at it, I hate math, I hate science. I was one of those kids, so we take those on, and we built this set of resources that has a creative tool, an app, although app is such a limiting concept. I think they're more than apps. Curriculum. There are reflection and storytelling components in all of the tools we created, and then teacher supports. And we've paid a lot of attention to Common Core, to content and processes, but we add a third ingredient that we call delight. And we see this again and again and again in the work we do with kids and teachers, that when they're using their tools, our tools, the first thing they want to do is Instagram their homework. How often does that happen? So I'm gonna show you a brief video that has kids speaking. They do it much better than I do.
The noticing tools are a suite of apps that we've created here at NYSCI. And a lot of the tools, they're taking pictures of themselves, and then they're using those pictures to learn lots of different math content. So it's really about kids at the center of their own learning. And what we found in testing that with kids and teachers in actual classrooms is that the kids are engaged right away.
So if you move the triangle, the pyramid, the surface area, the area of the side changes once you do that.
There's instant engagement, but then there's also a real conscious connection to the math content that's happening.
Let's switch to 25ths, that way our eyes will be lined up better. You can see how all the angles change.
Yeah, it's like step by step, each one there, there, there.
Whenever your left arm moves, the angle gets a little bit bigger.
Using the apps to just learn about simple math things that we've gone over in class is definitely more fun than just learning about it on a whiteboard and taking notes. It's really engaging. You really want to do it to see what comes out of it.
If you want to flip your arm or something, say you want to do a 180-degree turn versus a 90-degree turn, it's you really have to think about what's your end point and how can you use this math to help you get there. It's really interesting because I get to learn about the surface area and the volume of all of the shapes. This has a lot more surface area than I thought.
So we've been working with teachers to develop the apps as well as activities around the apps. Every teacher we've talked to is really excited about how all the tools can fit into their curriculum at various points. Also on our website, we have activities and curriculum for each app created by teachers. They're classroom ready.
I think I was surprised by how easily it worked together to convert math concepts into something you could look at, something you could relate to. When you were using all the apps, there wasn't one right answer. You could really do whatever you wanted. it could come to something different and still be right.
It's very good for actually seeing what it is, what you're learning.
They're really hands-on, and they're really cool and unique, and you can do a lot of things with them that you wouldn't expect.
I think that if I had this, I would be a lot better and a lot more enthusiastic about math.
So I was really struck when I saw that video that my colleagues made with what the kids called out, which was the connection between the sort of physical, the kinesthetic, the playful processes of doing and creating something, and these concepts that quickly get very abstract for learners, for all of us. And I think that's been, in designing these tools, that's been a real focus, is how do we create that bridge from the physical and experiential and playful aspects of doing things to the concepts that kids are required to learn in a way that helps them maintain those connections, right, and build them and strengthen them. So I'm going to give you a quick tour through the math apps, and the first one, Fraction Mash, so takes its inspiration from kind of the idea of photo effects. And what you're getting to do is basically mash up two pictures, right? So Puppy Tiger works really well for everyone, pretty much. But you can put any pictures. You can take pictures. You can mash up your friends. You can mash your teacher up with something. It's appropriately transgressive. And what you get to then is something like a puppy tiger, right? And the sort of all the while you're messing around with fractions, and you can get quite detailed in this work. So you can change the denominator, and you can really work at the level of pixels. So you can create a really beautiful representation of something. And of course, in the hands of skilled and experienced educators, there's a huge amount you can do to call out the math. Another app, Volumize, which is inspired by sort of the whole idea of geometric forms and structures to teach surface area and volume. It allows you to sort of take a problem like this, like what is the surface area and volume of the Guggenheim, or any building, or any object, or any person, really. And the app allows you to basically reconstruct the object in a series of geometric shapes that allow you to see very specifically surface area and volume. And then it has this really nice, cool little feature involved. So we're really trying to kind of marry these processes of learning and what I would call sort of aesthetic creation. Choreograph, a third app inspired by dance to teach concepts like rotation and translation and reflection. And so here's another example of what we think of as problem worth solving, right? You know, create a superhero of your choosing and have him fly across a cityscape. So we thought it was appropriate for this meeting to have Grover flying around. But there is a huge amount. What you really have with Choreograph is a very powerful but easy to use and accessible animation studio that calls out these concepts like translations. That always seemed like a huge abstraction to me as part of middle grade math. Makes them very grounded, very explicit, very concrete, and the math can be very self-evident as you're working the way through the program. We do forewarn educators that one of the first things kids will do with this app is take a picture of their teacher. The app makes a suggestion, take a picture of your teacher, and then you can cut your teacher up, and it's very cool, and animate them in the form of a puppet, make them dance, make them move, make them fly like Grover. So again, it has a kind of sort of irresistible, slightly transgressive quality to it, which works well for middle school students. And then finally, size-wise, which is inspired by something we all know and love, forced perspective photography. And basically what kids are doing, so in the app there is a library of props, hundreds of props, and kids are thinking about scenes they want to create with these props and stories they want to tell. And ultimately they're creating comic books. This is just a little illustration of how Madison is exploring proportional relationships between herself and the Statue of Liberty. So here you can see she's almost at 1/2. Here she's at 1/2. And then again, in the hands of a teacher, you can really sort of pull out the mathematical data. Those are the math tools. So the final tool I'd like to show you is playground physics, and it actually takes its inspiration from our very own science playground at NYSCI. I'm told we have the largest science playground in North America. Never fact-checked that, though. So again, briefer video showing kids using this.
The SciPlay app is an app that allows you to see the physics in your everyday life. Like when you're running, jumping, or doing any activities, you can take a video and it can show what the physics in your everyday life is.
You have to do some kind of movement, any kind of movement. You can do jumping jacks, anything you want. You could jump, leap, anything you want. You just have to put in how much you weigh and like just some information about yourself.
I learned a lot of science stuff like speed, kinetic energy, and all that stuff.
You can show the movements of your head and your body, and like if you pause it and you play back it slowly, you can click dots to show the movements, and it's very fun. It's very educational too. It helps you learn about potential energy, kinetic energy, motion, and force. The SciPlay app is really fun. You could have a lot of fun doing it than writing lab reports on paper.
I think it's different because you get to go on the iPad and then in classroom you can like take down notes. So you prefer to use it on the iPad than in your notebook.
I understand it better when it's in the app. From the book, they don't really show it. I mean, like, they just tell you it, but they don't really show it. From the app, you can do it by yourself.
I can see everything really clearly, the kinetic energy and speed.
Having so much fun is the best time.
I think it's very fun and educational because you could find out more about potential and kinetic energy.
It's so exciting and eager to do another experiment with it.
So whoever thought potential and kinetic energy could be so exciting? So this app allows you to look at different performances that kids are shooting. As you saw in the video, they're filming one another's performances on the playground, in the classroom, really anywhere, and look at them through 3 different lenses: motion, force, and energy. And in each lens, you're invited to enter a certain amount of data that then helps produce additional data about the performance. So sometimes you're entering your own weight, sometimes you're entering the weight of the object you're tossing or the distance between you and your friends. But the thing, so there are people in this room that know this app was a long time in making, like many years and several years. And the thing we learned in the course of doing this is not to overly automate the generation of data, right? Again, because you want kids to sort of maintain the connection between the physical experience of playing and a concept like potential and kinetic energy. So we do things like allowing them, one of the boys in the video referenced this, to mark the trajectory of a performance, whether it's a ball throwing or you running or you doing gymnastics or whatever. And then you can slow down and look at that performance through these different kinds of lenses so you can see exactly when potential energy changes into kinetic energy. And you have a whole different understanding of the concept. There's the energy lens, the force lens. And we've been rolling these out with teachers, and the kinds of things that we're hearing and learning is, so the importance of being able to kind of learn and play at the same time, the importance of being able to get up and be physically active. I don't know how many of you read that really interesting blog post that was floating around out there by a teacher who was becoming an instructional coach in a high school, and she decided to spend the day shadowing a student. And the post was all about it was all about boredom, really. But I think the thing that hit me over the head was kids are so profoundly passive in school. Not only intellectually passive, but physically passive. So we really encourage kids to get up, work together, be playful, run around. All of those kinds of things are important. I think one of the things that's been powerful with the people we've been working with is this idea that you can do math, you can do science in these very different kinds of contexts, not just in the form of textbooks or worksheets. And finally, the issue of being able to sort of have divergent solutions to really, this was a bit of a surprise to us, but teachers referencing the fact that the app allows them easily to differentiate instruction for learners with very low lift on their end, because the tool is built to accommodate kids who are at very different levels of knowledge and expertise. And it's meant to draw them in by engaging them. So we're currently in the middle of a national beta rollout, and you all, anybody in this room is welcome to get involved. You just go to noticing.nysci.org and you can sign up. We're doing it in a phased way. So each kind of 2-week period, there's a different app that we're rolling out. And what we're asking for in return is just feedback, input, help with this stuff. So I will stop there on time. Questions? Thank you.
Hello. I just wanted to ask a question. So is this something that's going to be rolled out as part of like a curriculum or individual apps, or how do you plan on doing this, distributing it to schools?
So the apps will eventually be available in the App Store, and we've built a number of curriculum sort of resources that go along with them, but one of the things we're really interested in doing is, growing a community of educators who are invested in using these kinds of tools and can contribute additional instructional resources. And also a big issue that comes up is how do we use this for more sort of efficacious approaches to assessment that is about, putting the child at the center of the activity. It's their performance. What are they learning? It's potentially a very different sort of model to think about assessment practices. So we're interested in that too.
Hi. I'm here in the middle.
Hi.
I'm wondering if you could talk more about how you embrace the diversity of your audience and not only modifications, but maybe affordances you find from the diversity?
Yeah, so the diversity of our audiences has everything to do with how we think and how we design experiences. And I think we design sort of from the point of view that, so we're, at our place, we're a science center, right? Which means people vote with their feet. And so you don't, unlike in a school, you don't really have a captive audience. So people who are creating exhibition and program museums on the floor of the museum think long and hard about how you create something that is so irresistible, no child is going to want to walk away from it. And I think particularly in the work we've done around designing and making, that what we see is that creating problem frames that give kids ownership over what they're creating is really, really important. So I'll give you a specific example. In our design lab, we have an activity we call Happy City. And it's a circuit building activity, but we don't call it Circuit Building 101. We call it Happy City. And the invitation that kids are given is design something that will make this growing kind of cityscape that's in this environment kids are making a happier place. That's it. And there's facilitation that supports them in learning how to build circuits and switches and those kinds of things. So what that frame does is allow kids to start from their place of interest. And so, you know, in all candor, what that means is you get a lot of Pizza Huts houses, right? Kids like pizza, you know, you get them with blinky lights and those kinds of things. But so very low barrier to entry. But on the other end, there's also a high ceiling of possibility. So we've had kids create, you know, really clever things like a breeze hut. On a hot day, you can climb inside this little structure. There's a fan, switch on the top, and you go inside to cool off. So a very different, you know, kind of experience and possibility with sort of, you know, more sophistication, if you like, involved. But the point is, and I do think this is in so much of what happens in formal ed, this is where we get it wrong. We forget about what you know, Tim said it, we forget about the importance of love. We forget about the importance of emotion, of caring, of connecting to what you're doing. And what I've learned in my 6 years at NYSCI is that you have to lead with that. That's what's most important. You really have to engage kids, and the rest can follow if the experiences are well designed and the facilitation is good and all of those kinds of things. But we forget that actually letting kids care deeply about what they're doing is really important to learning. And that's what we try to do.
One more up here.
Hi.
Hi.
My question goes back to kind of the diversity of who you're exposing this to. And I'm wondering, do you just have contact with kids in your space, or do you have a way to get out and to maybe underserved communities or branch out to places where kids wouldn't normally get to see this kind of thing?
Yeah, so the short answer to that is yes. And one of the reasons why we've invested in the kind of Beyond the Walls digital tool strategy is we want kids to have irresistible learning experiences wherever they are. And so that's kind of important to us, very important to us on a broad scale. But more specifically, locally, we've built a program, we call it NYSCI Neighbors, where we work really closely with our 3 local communities, Corona, Flushing, and Elmhurst. So what makes Queens really interesting is that many of the communities there are communities of aspiration. People have moved from all over the world, often to create more opportunity for their children. So in Corona, we're told by our collaborators in various schools there that on report card day, they get 100% family participation, right? That doesn't happen, but it happens in Corona. It happens because parents realize that education is really important for their children getting a leg up in the world. So the point about Neighbors is it wasn't just creating a program, it was really working in concert with all sorts of different stakeholders in these communities to make the walls of the museum more permeable and to create an invitation in. When we first began to roll out this program, we'd go to local schools and we'd be addressing 400 or 500 parents, and my colleagues would say, so how many of you know what that building across the street is? And 4 hands would go up. And that's pretty stunning. And we realized that people weren't visiting because they didn't know what we were. There was no there was just like with the design problems, there was no invitation on our part to come and learn and join and get involved. So we created all sorts of ways of doing that, and we're still working on that. It's an ongoing process.
Hey, Margaret, I just have another quick question. It's actually the flip of that question. I'm interested in sort of knowing, how do you actually manage all the diversity that you have, right? So you're in Queens, hundreds of thousands of people come from New York. You host one of the world's largest maker fairs. I don't remember what it was, like 80, 90,000.
85.
85,000
I'm not allowed to
people
say more than
coming.
85,000.
And now you have the
suite.
suite.
The police.
Oh, okay. And now you have this suite of apps, which is going to, sort of take NYSCI and everything you do and sort of expand it into, the world potentially, right, into the app stores. What have been some of the biggest challenges that you've faced in sort of
He knows the answer to this question because Paul's been helping us. It's not so much challenges. I mean, actually, probably one of the biggest challenges, which I think we've largely gotten over, was particularly, so a lot of our sources of revenue is funded, foundations, corporations, right? It's kind of 30 earned, 60% institutional fundraising, and then 10% sort of donated. But it was getting over the hurdle of, but you're a science center. Why would you, why are you doing all this stuff? And it was, I think what we've succeeded at doing is kind of developing a narrative that has to do with sort of addressing the question of where does innovation in the education sector really come from, or where can it come from? And then kind of leveraging the power of our place and the incredible diversity of our visitors. And we have 170 young people who work with us annually as our explainers, kind of docents in the museum. They greet visitors and make them feel welcome and do demos and interpret exhibits and staff design lab and those kinds of things. And, a typical class, this year's class, I'm told, speaks 27 different languages. So we use all of that kind of interesting diversity and creative energy to fuel everything we're doing at the Hall of Science, and particularly to fuel, I always say, so it's easy to do. It's not really. It's easy to do what we do at the museum, right? Meaning, nobody's there saying you can't. We're not part of some big bureaucracy. We can, right? But the much bigger payoff, I think, in the work we do is, can we make a difference for kids in the formal education system, particularly kids who are in underserved schools, which we've heard a lot of chatter about this, where, everything is squeezed out of the curriculum except what is tested. And so much of what is going on in underserved schools is about rote instruction. It has nothing to do with creativity. There is no possibility for kids to fall in love with anything. And that's, for us, that's the big game changer. So that's really, it's not so much an obstacle. It's, you have to be persuasive and convince people you're worth investing in. And there are challenges about, Paul knows as well. So how do we effectively drive this work into the world, right? How do we sustain it? How do we get it into those high-need schools and communities? But those are opportunities that we'll figure out how to solve. So, thank you.